Would you be confident in maintaining your sanity while stranded in the middle of nowhere, as maggots are literally eating the flesh off your bones? Today I will present to you two stories of people who got injured deep in the mountains, with wounds so bad their flesh began rotting off, inviting unwelcomed guests to feast on their body. One man had broken multiple bones throughout his body, but survived 6 days until people came to his rescue. Another man would somehow stay alive for 2 weeks while smelling his own body rotting away. In both cases they would be hosting a swarm of maggots inside their wounds, but ultimately these small critters may have been what kept them alive. Nittazawa is a river located to the north of Shizuoka City, and is an area rarely visited, other than the occasional fishing enthusiast. In 1992, one such fishing enthusiast would decide to venture into this part of the mountains. The man was a 50-year-old high school teacher with decades of experience in the outdoors. He understood the importance of letting people know where you are going in case anything went wrong. This was especially true back in 1992 when this story takes place, before cell phones were widespread. The man wrote a map on where he would be camping, along with the route he would take to get there and back, and gave this map to his wife. As an added precaution, he called his brother that if he were not back within 6 days, to assume something had gone wrong and call the police. On the evening of August 9th, the man begins heading to Nittazawa by car. He arrives at the closest parking lot on the morning of the next day, and from there makes his way on foot. He had visited this area before, but right before reaching the riverbed, the man ran into a vertical cliff he didn't remember being there. Because he was almost at his destination and he didn't want to turn back, he attempts to descend a relatively gentle section of the cliff. And this is where his memory goes blank, as if someone had flipped the switch. When the man comes to, he finds himself lying on his side at the bottom of the cliff. His clothes were drenched in blood, and enough time had passed for the blood to become coagulated. His forehead and right forearm were split open, and his right leg was numb. As he rolls up his pants to check the condition of his leg, he finds a bone sticking out, with blood and lymphatic fluid being visibly pumped out. As the man evaluates his situation, he decides the best option he has was to make it to the riverbed 100 meters or 300 feet away. The riverbed was visible, although barely, from a road, and the man hoped to be able to catch the attention of a car passing by. Due to his injuries, it took 4 excruciating hours to travel the 100 meters. He creates a makeshift flag out of a stick and towel, and tries to get someone to notice him from the road on the other side of the river. But because the road was so far away, and so few cars would pass through this remote area in the first place, the man's efforts end up in vain. Exhausted, the man falls asleep on the riverbed. He had left his backpack where he had fallen off the cliff, so he was forced to sleep out in the open, exposed to the elements. The next day he would continue waving the flag at passing cars, but to no avail. In the early afternoon it would begin to rain heavily, causing the blood from his injury to ooze out onto the ground. Combined with the humidity and heat on this summer day, his body fluids attracted a large number of flies that would swarm around him throughout the afternoon and following night. He felt a strange tingling sensation on his injured leg, but because it was already dark, he couldn't check the condition of it visually, although the man did notice something like white dust being stuck to his leg. On the morning of the third day, the man decides to go back to where he had initially woken up after the fall, and where his backpack and equipment still was. He would need the food he brought with him, and he could conserve energy better sleeping in a tent. The tingling sensation on his leg had gotten stronger, and when he rolls up his pants, he is shocked to see countless maggots crawling inside his wound. The man attempts to wash them out in the river, but there were too many, and they had already dug too deep into his wound to get them all out. He decides to forget about the maggots for the time being, and continues making his way to his backpack. Once he gets his hands on his equipment, he sets up camp, and tries his best to conserve energy while waiting for rescue. The date was August 12th, and he recalled telling his brother to call for help if he did not return on the 14th. So, if he held on for a few days, someone should come and find him, with some luck. He spent the following days in his tent, rationing his food and obtaining water from the river. On August 14th, when he goes to the river to fill up his water bottle, something in the reflection of the water catches his eye. To his horror, there were maggots crawling inside the open wound on his scalp. To make matters worse, when he tried to wash them out, a few of them made their way to his eye socket. The man, who had been relatively composed up to this point, goes into a panic and frantically tries to remove the maggots from inside his eye. After calming down, although he wasn't sure if he had gotten them all out, he goes back to his tent. He would spend the night listening to sounds of maggots crawling inside his scalp. Fortunately, early in the morning of the 16th, rescuers were able to find his tent, and he was airlifted to a nearby hospital. Examinations would find multiple broken bones throughout his body, but after surgery and rehabilitation, he was able to make an almost full recovery. The only lasting effects he suffered were to his tear ducts, which he had damaged when attempting to claw the maggots out from his eye. All in all, it was a miracle he was able to make it back in one piece after being left in the summer heat and humidity for almost a week with so many open injuries. Ironically, the maggots may have actually helped him by eating dead flesh off his wounds and preventing infection. The fact that this man had prepared for a worst-case scenario by telling his wife and brother where he was going and when to call for help was the largest factor that saved his life. The protagonist of the next story was much less prepared. On August 13, 2010, a college student decides that he wants to climb a mountain on a whim. He goes through a mountain guidebook from 20 years ago that his parents had, and randomly chooses Ryokami Mountain, located in the Chichibu mountain range to the northwest of Tokyo. The guidebook said it was a 6-hour course, so the young man assumes it can't be that hard. He tells his mother that he is going to Ryokami Mountain, and begins heading towards the mountain range on the evening of that day. He spends the night in an internet cafe, and on the following day purchases a couple of rice balls, a bag of mixed nuts, and some pieces of candy at a convenience store, and begins making his way to the summit at around 10 AM, which is a relatively late time to begin a 6-hour hike. His time of departure was particularly concerning because the last bus home was leaving at 4:30 PM, giving his schedule very little room for breaks or errors. Nonetheless, the man successfully arrives on the summit at around 1 PM. He had originally planned to go back the way he came, but for whatever reason decides to take a more difficult route on descent. However, perhaps due to anxiety from the possibility of missing his bus home, he begins to rush through the trail carelessly. He slips while traversing a steep slope, and slides down 40 meters or roughly 130 feet. Initially everything seems to be okay. He had just slipped. All he had to do was get back up to the trail. But when he puts his weight on his left leg, extreme pain shoots up his body. When the man glances at his left ankle, his sock is red with blood, and he can see the bones sticking out. He didn't have a first aid kit with him, so he wraps his ankle with a spare t-shirt and a plastic bag. Because he couldn't move, he had no choice but to stay where he was, eating the bag of mixed nuts and a few pieces of candy that he had, and drinking water from a nearby puddle for the time being. He would stay in this spot for the next couple days, and when he checks his ankle on day 3, he notices countless maggots crawling in and around the wound his bone was sticking out of. He attempts to get them out, but as was the case with the previous story, there were too many, and they had already made it deep within his body. On day 5, the man had run out of food, and had consumed the entire puddle he was drinking out of. So, he somehow crawls a few hours to a nearby river, to be close to a new water source. By this time he began to notice the smell of rotting flesh coming from his foot, and assumes that even if he were to be rescued, his left foot would have to be amputated. Meanwhile, his mother had actually called the police on the day her son had not come back, and from day 2, rescue teams were looking for the missing college student. But because the only information they had was that the man was somewhere on Ryokami Mountain, they had to pretty much scour the entire mountain range, which took significantly more time and effort compared to if they knew what route he was taking. 2 weeks after the man had gone missing, rescue teams notice a body on the riverbed. As they approach, they see no movement from the body, and the smell of rotting flesh could be noticed from a fair distance away, so they assumed the worst. But as they get closer, they notice the body still has breath, although barely noticeable. He is rushed to a hospital, and after multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation, he was actually able to keep his foot and make a full recovery. Again, it was speculated that the reason his foot was saved from amputation, even after 2 weeks of the wound being open, was the fact that the maggots had eaten away the rotting flesh. So, if you ever find yourself in the middle of nowhere with a gaping wound, it actually may be a good thing to have these critters crawling inside of you. A big thank you to Korbachu and my other Patreons for supporting this channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. And as always, thank you for watching until the end. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. I'll see you next time.